scream never left her mouth, because she knew no one would hear it anyway, but her hand trembled as she raised it just high enough for someone, anyone, to see. The street smelled of rain and rust, and the world felt like it had quietly decided she no longer belonged in it. That was when the roar of an engine cut through the silence, deep and rough like thunder dragging its knuckles across the pavement, and the elderly lady realized this might be her last chance. She lifted her hand again, slower this time, forming the signal she had learned decades ago when survival still felt possible. Before the story pulls you deeper into what happened next, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet power of doing the right thing when no one is watching. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because stories like this connect hearts across the world. The elderly woman's name was Margaret Holloway, and at 79, she had learned how to disappear in plain sight. Years of being overlooked had taught her that the world rarely stopped for fragile things. She lived in a narrow apartment above a closed-down bakery, its windows boarded and its sign faded like an old memory. Her husband had died 15 years earlier, her son even before that, and what remained of her life was a careful routine of quiet mornings, lukewarm tea, and evenings spent listening to the ticking clock that reminded her she was still here. That routine had been broken weeks ago when her new caretaker arrived, a man assigned through an agency that promised safety and dignity. What it delivered instead was fear wrapped in politeness, control disguised as help, and a constant pressure that made Margaret feel like she was shrinking inside her own skin. She did not bruise easily anymore, but her spirit did. The caretaker decided when she ate, when she slept, when she spoke on the phone, and when she was allowed to leave the apartment. He laughed when she questioned him and sighed loudly when she needed help, making her feel like a burden rather than a human being. Margaret had tried to report it once, dialing a number she barely remembered, but the call was interrupted, and afterward the phone was moved just out of reach. Over time, she learned to stay quiet, to conserve energy, to wait. Survival, she knew, was sometimes about patience. But that night, when she managed to slip out under the excuse of throwing out the trash and felt his presence behind her on the stairs, something inside her snapped. Fear sharpened into clarity, and clarity into resolve. Outside, the street was nearly empty, slick with rain and dimly lit by flickering lamps. Her heart pounded not with panic but with urgency. She remembered the signal from a community safety program she had once watched on television, a simple movement meant to ask for help without words. She raised her hand, folded her thumb, and wrapped her fingers around it, holding it close to her chest. She did not know if anyone would recognize it. She did not even know if anyone cared. Then she heard the motorcycle. The Hell's Angel riding it was named Jack Calder, though most people knew him only by his leather vest, the heavy boots, and the skull patch that made mothers pull their children closer. Jack had spent most of his life being judged before he ever opened his mouth. He was 46, his beard threaded with gray, his knuckles scarred from years of work and worse decisions. He had joined the club in his 20s, drawn to the brotherhood when his own family had fallen apart, and though he had long since left the chaos behind, the image followed him everywhere. That night, he was riding home after visiting a fellow veteran who still struggled with the war they both pretended not to remember. His mind was heavy, his thoughts distant, and he almost missed her. Something about the way Margaret stood, small and rigid against the brick wall, made Jack slow down. It was not just her age or the way her coat hung loosely from her shoulders. It was her hand. He had seen that signal before, years earlier, during a safety training at a shelter his club had helped renovate after a fire. At the time, he had barely paid attention, but now the memory surged forward like a warning bell. Jack pulled over, the engine rumbling beneath him, and watched as a shadow moved behind her near the stairwell. Jack had spent his life reacting before thinking, and that instinct kicked in now. He did not storm in or raise his voice. He did not play the role the world expected of him. Instead, he positioned his bike between Margaret and the building, making himself visible, unavoidable, and calm. His presence alone shifted the air, and the shadow hesitated. Jack's heart pounded, not with anger, but with something older and steadier. Responsibility. The kind that comes when you know that if you look away, you will never forgive yourself. Margaret felt it immediately, the change. The pressure in her chest eased just enough for her to breathe. She had no idea who this man was, only that he had seen her. Really seen her. The caretaker's steps faltered, his confidence draining as he assessed the situation and decided that whatever control he thought he had did not extend into the street. He retreated without a word, disappearing back into the building, leaving behind the truth of who he was. Jack stayed. He did not rush her. He did not overwhelm her with questions. He simply stayed close enough that she felt protected but not trapped. In the quiet that followed, Margaret's strength wavered, and years of fear pressed against the edges of her composure. Jack noticed the way her hands shook, the way she leaned slightly as if the ground itself was uncertain. He knew that look. He had worn it himself after nights when the memories got too loud. What happened next no one expected, least of all Margaret. Jack did not just make sure she was safe for the moment. He helped her sit, called for assistance from resources he knew through his club's charity work, and waited until help arrived. He made sure her story was heard, that it was written down, that it could not be erased or ignored. When authorities and social workers came, they were surprised to find a Hell's Angel calmly explaining the situation with clarity and care, advocating fiercely for a woman most of the world had already forgotten. Margaret was relocated that night to a safe place, somewhere warm and quiet, where the doors locked from the inside and the staff spoke gently. In the days that followed, her life began to expand again in small but meaningful ways. She was given choices, real ones, and reminded that her voice mattered. Jack checked in through the social worker, never intruding, never asking for gratitude. He returned to his routines, but something in him had shifted too. The weight he carried felt lighter, as if helping her had helped him reclaim a piece of himself he thought was gone. Weeks later, Margaret sat by a window in her new apartment, sunlight resting on her hands as she held a cup of tea that was finally hot enough. She thought about how close she had come to disappearing completely, and how a man the world feared had been the one to see her worth most clearly. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, it felt like something she was allowed to have. Jack rode past that street sometimes, not out of habit, but out of remembrance. He understood now that redemption was not a single grand act, but a series of quiet decisions to show up when it mattered. The patch on his back still drew stares, but he carried it differently now, knowing that goodness did not need permission or approval to exist. If this story has reached something tender inside you, if it reminded you that help can come from unexpected places and that no one is ever too small or too broken to be saved, please take a moment near the end of this video to like, share, and engage with it, because your support helps stories like this travel further. And before the ending, we ask you to comment below and tell us what part of this story stayed with you the most, because your words matter more than you think. Margaret's life did not become perfect, and Jack did not become a hero in the newspapers, but something far more important happened that night. Two people, written off in different ways by the same world, reminded each other what humanity still looked like. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything.